session to order and start with a roll call.
Alderperson Robinson.
Present.
Hurt. Gilbert.
Present.
Swanson.
Here.
Parker. Here. Poulos.
Here.
Healy.
Here.
And Mayor Tomes.
Here. All right, public comment. Anybody sign up back there?
Here's Sony, go check.
Nobody signed up. Didn't see anybody here. Yeah. Take care of him later. Yes, exactly. Nobody signed up for public comment, so we can go right into the presentations. Miles, you're up.
All right. Good evening, good evening, good evening. So we're here for part 2 of our series of inspections-related presentations. I am going to blow through these slides real fast because I know we've got another presentation that will probably generate a lot of Q&A, so too may this. So I just want to preface it by saying that if we want to do any follow-up, if there are additional questions that folks want to see answered later on, we can do more presentations in the months to come. I'm also joined tonight by Jared Irvin, building official. So if there's any questions that I cannot answer, I will defer to the expert. All right, so the Rental Housing Registry or Rental Ordinance has been around since 2004. This is taken right out of the code. Its purposes are pretty straightforward. We want to have safe rental housing, right? Meets minimum code. The basic kind of process for registration is more or less how you'd imagine it to be. Someone creates a rental unit, they apply for a rental license, we send an inspector who does an initial code compliance inspection. If it passes, then they get their license. Reinspection takes place based on a categorization or a class that is assigned to different types of rental property depending on their quality, and then that reinspection cycle goes from there with an annual fee based on the size. That fee schedule looks like this, with the initial inspection costing a pittance, really, $16. Compliance inspections, the first one's free, then they're $55 after, so that's when we're coming back to make sure it's good. For fourplexes or smaller, we're looking at an annual base fee of $35 with another $12 tagged on for each of those units. If it's more than a fourplex, then it's $110 is the base fee with $12 per unit. Frequency of its inspection, you can see there's these 4 rental classes. N at the bottom means new, right? So if it's new, presumably it's to code, no issues, for every 4 years. And then you have A, B, C, minimal, minor, major. That has to do with what kinds of things were seen during that initial inspection. So things are inspected either every 4 years, 2 years, or in the worst case, every year. Plus, when following up on tenant complaints. Staffing the program. So there are 3 housing and property maintenance inspectors who are generally responsible for doing these rental inspections, but they're also responsible for many other things, including just general property maintenance, weed and grass in the summer, and so on. Staff levels have, unfortunately, varied quite a bit over time. As a recent example, one of the positions was held open to address COVID budgetary issues following a retirement. So we went a few years now without all 3. There's also an admin assistant. This is a position that has come in and out of existence depending on budgetary realities over time. That is filled at present. And so right now, Jared is working on hiring that final position. Hopefully we'll have it filled soon. Tenant complaints are a big part of the program, so if you're renting and you have an issue, you can always contact the inspectors and ask that they investigate that problem. They will come out, and if there are issues that can be cited, they will be. Sometimes those are pretty straightforward and easily resolved once the landlord is told about them. Other times it can go down the road of municip's enforcement depending on the severity. Occasionally, and this is very important to note, there will be a dispute between the tenant and the landlord that isn't strictly speaking about the actual building code issues, but is instead something of a different nature. In those cases, it's civil, and the inspectors are not mediators for those situations and do not get involved. Similarly, so there is occasionally issues of retaliation. Tenants complain about something, the landlord doesn't like that they got tattled on. They may have some sort of dispute, again, that is not within the purview of this ordinance. It's a civil matter. Finally, eviction due to severe code violations. It's pretty rare that we go into a unit and say it's so unfit that we have to have the tenant removed. But when that does occur, staff make every effort to refer them to appropriate resources. So, this ordinance was originally passed in 2004. It is now 2024. So, 20 years later, not very many amendments having been made to it, how well has this all worked? Well, I invite you to a little mathematical thought experiment. I'm not particularly good at math, so I've done a little rounding, but I just kind of want to walk you through some stats and kind of give you a sense of why we are where we're at, all right? So this is information from the U.S. Census Bureau's most recent American Community Survey. So you can see that of all the housing units that are occupied in the city, so we're looking at a little over 15,200 units, almost 38% of those units are rental units. So we're talking about, 5,700 rental units. About 2/3 of the housing, or nearly 2/3 of the housing in Rock Island is pre-1960. So one can infer with these stats together that the bulk of rental housing is also about that old and therefore may have some code issues, okay? So let's assume that all of those rental units are deteriorated and they were being inspected on an annual basis. We have 3 inspectors. So that would roughly come out to 40 inspections per week per inspector to do that. An ideal rental inspection where there's nothing amiss and everything is right, 30 minutes. So you're really thinking about each of those inspectors spending half of every week, half of all their working hours, doing nothing but in the field inspections, on top of all of the other things they're responsible for. All of the property maintenance issues that they may be investigating, any sort of munices proceedings that they are working on, their administrative functions, and so on. This is a tall task, okay? And I can tell you many, many, many of our rental units are falling into this annual inspection cycle per the standards of the ordinance at present. What does this mean? It means that we have never in all these 20 years been able to catch up. We've never been able to get through the bulk of the rental units out there. Many are still unidentified, changing status and ownership pretty frequently. And the code enforcement process can be quite complicated, with the different views of tenants and landlords often drawing individual cases out. Say a tenant doesn't want to let us in to view the issues at present. There's all sorts of things that are in the mix that eat up a lot of time. And then, of course, there's also the fact that staff have at different points needed to change priorities or look at other things within the scope of their overall responsibilities, which has reduced the functioning of this particular program. There might be an uptick in property maintenance issues during a particular period of time, and staff are reassigned to deal with those at the expense of this program. Still, good news is that over time, with kind of COVID being a blip in here, staff have been working towards doing more and more inspections, right? So the ordinance being what it is, we're still managing towards an upward trend, managing towards success. So overall, the trend is moving gradually in the right direction. There are some solutions staff are starting to think about as we continue to evaluate this program and think about how it could be made to work better. Really changing the expectations about frequency of inspection is probably the primary issue at play. Are we really going to be able to do what the ordinance says we're supposed to do now? No, we're not. We need to evaluate whether or not those frequencies of inspection should be changed. There are some things we have already implemented and will continue to implement, streamlining processes with simpler inspection forms and similar processes for going through enforcement. That's something that Jared has been working on with his team. Hopefully in the near future, some new software tools will also assist with this process, so going to a full digital registration system and not being so paper-based should help with things. Curiously enough, our neighbor Moline actually just for the first time adopted a rental inspection program, patterned after ours, I will say. And so it's also a good opportunity for us to look at things like our fee structure and see if it's time for that to be reevaluated to more closely mirror what they are doing next door. And so with that, I'd like to open the floor to questions. Got that in 10 minutes.
I don't know if it's really a question or more of a comment, but I guess I'm kind of concerned the fact that we are unable to do inspections, especially with majority of the homes in my ward. Seeing some of the stuff that I've reported to you before, the fact that we're unable to do the inspections we have right now. So, are we just short-staffed?
It really comes down to the fact that we're just having to go back and do so many inspections every year, and that may be overkill in some respects, right? We're never able to get to all of them because we're always having to cycle back to go back to them the way that ranking, that classification system. So one of the things we need to ask ourselves is something like this, and I'm just throwing a number out. Let's say we just, as a standard, said we are going to inspect every rental unit at minimum once every 5 years, unless we get a complaint, in which case we will investigate that. When we change it to something like that as the standard interval, it becomes possible for us to do the critical thing, which is get into all of them at one point or another.
So is the reason that you have to go back so often is because of what you find? Or is just the fact that that's how it's written? You have to come back every year or every 2 years?
In a way, the answer is yes. Part of it is that we were never able to get over the initial hump. Like, we were never able to do that initial full-fledged.
inspection.
Right. So 20 years later, with all of those other challenges compounding it, we've never been able to catch up. It'd be better if we had that kind of more generous interval so that we could be more responsive to complaints and other issues as they presented themselves. Does that make sense?
It does. So it kind of leads to another question. With the age of the homes, let's say throughout this part of the city. So when they're doing the renovations, they're pretty much gutting a good portion of the house out, right?
If there's a renovation taking place that could be happening, sure.
Does that now come and play with the suppression system ordinance? Does that
If
need to be
you're doing a
installed?
full gut rehab of an existing house, you are not required to put back in a full sprinkler system, no. That's only for new construction.
Only new construction?
Yes.
Okay, I thought that went for renovations also.
No.
Okay.
And if you're also doing a proper, fully vetted, permitted and inspected gut rehab, the chances when you're finished, when we go to do like the rental inspection, that there are any residual issues, very minor.
Gotcha. Okay.
I think the question that I have is, and it just comes from a nearby city and their issues, but if you find, so I know multiple, landlords hold multiple properties. So if you find a property that a certain landlord has that has issues, would at that point, we move the rest of those properties perhaps up to make sure that we don't run into a situation where you've got one landlord who's really just not taking care of any of their properties?
This is something we talk about quite a lot internally. Curiously enough, we do not have a software solution in place currently that allows us to do quick searches like that, so it's all manual and just in like Excel spreadsheets. A smart landlord will hold every single property more or less in a different LLC. We notice, for example, just the humorous ways in which the same combination of letters and words just get rearranged for different rental, properties. Currently, we're just not in a place where we're able to do that, though that is an aspiration that we have, because we certainly do have some landlords who hold significant numbers of properties that are in distress, and they are warranting a higher level of scrutiny. So it's something we're talking about, but our ability to do it very effectively at this time is limited.
Okay.
I guess I would be in favor of something that you're talking about, moving the inspections back a couple years. I guess my concern is, let's use the Stern Center. Present staff was not here when I purchased it and had to renovate. I can name you 2 specific incidents. Doing my HVAC unit, I go to get a bid. One company specifically would not even give me a quote because it was in Rock Island. They didn't want to deal with inspections. The other one, the quote was 50% higher than any other bid, and they literally called it a Rock Island tax because they knew they were going to get messed with. So another example I have is I went to look at a property here, and as soon as we go in, it was, you'll have to do this, you'll have to do this, oh, you can't do that, you have to change that, you need to do this. Where I go visit a property in a sister city, and I'm asking questions, and the building official stopped me and said, it is our job to get you in this city. You know, it's not my job to tell you no, it's how can we do this, not how can't we. So my concern would be is if you're only going in some of these properties every 5 years, you come in and drop a hammer on somebody, and all of a sudden it's $25,000 to renovate a house, and they don't have it. So I would really challenge who is going through, and it's getting to how can we, not how can't we do this.
I think there's kind of two responses to the 2 points. One is, I think that since Mr. Irvin has been building official, we've been focused more and more on the customer service element of the work.
Yeah.
And that moving us to a yes,
Yes.
being really the focus of what we do, is something that we discuss quite a bit. Our job is not to penalize anybody or bring the hammer down. It is instead to help them figure out a way to be part of a solution. So that's number one, something we talk about quite a bit.
Good.
And I am familiar with some of those past experiences, as others have described them as well. Secondarily, if a property really is in severe deteriorated state, we do have an obligation to tell the property owner that that is the case. Sometimes there's just no getting around the fact that, like, hey, this foundation is collapsed. You're going to need to put in a significant amount of money to fix that. And that's just the truth. But never more than the minimum. That's the important part. If we are looking at a property and we're laying out, these are all the things that you would need to do to achieve code compliance, that's a minimum, nothing beyond it. And so that's an important thing that we often are kind of counseling folks on. We're not asking you to go above code, we're asking you to meet the same code that everyone else around us would be required to ask you to meet. The tone, though, of that delivery is, I think, what you're touching on, and that is something that we continue to discuss.
Sometimes it's not what you say, it's how you say it.
Correct.
You can say the same exact
Correct.
thing the same way, and I've just had those conversations, and, previous staff, it was just,
Yeah, we don't relish telling people bad news,
I
but
understand that.
unfortunately, that is the principal responsibility that we often have.
understandable.
How often are we evicting tenants? How often have we evicted a tenant due to a failed rental inspection in the last 5 years?
Not very frequently at all, and I would actually defer to Mr. Irvin to maybe talk a little bit about, how that usually goes down, how often that happens, and what we do when that takes place.
I had one in my ward.
Yeah, it's something that does happen. It's something that we don't take lightly. There may be, in the last year, I think there may have been 3 that we've had to post unfit based on code violations, life safety, structure fires, things of that nature.
3 in the past year? Is that what you said?
Yep.
Okay. I think as we continue to think about housing in general, identifying, you say that you refer these tenants to housing partners, but we know that there's a lack of housing available for people, right? The Silos to Solutions document says that we need to have over 6,000 new units in the Quad Cities, right? 6,000 is an awful lot. So we can refer them to partner agencies, but they're going to shrug their shoulders and say, wish we could help you, right? Do you see any, is including this discussion within the overall housing strategic plan on your radar?
It is. One of the, obviously those stats, right, show our existing rental housing stock is very deteriorated. It's not just that we need all those new units, but we need to work on improving the existing units as well.
Right.
Some of the issues that we have with folks being removed because of code compliance are to do with the deteriorated housing stock. In your ward this past year, we had another situation where someone was removed, and it was actually a slightly different situation as well. And some of them become quite complicated, as in that case where I think mental health was also part of the challenge.
Yep.
So,
No, that wasn't
so
for rental.
to answer your one question, yes, for sure, that's part of that larger planning process. I would add, though, that like the exact circumstances under which someone might be removed from their property can be wide-ranging. So it's not just a question of is there housing for a person to go to, but are there also sufficient supportive services depending on the exact nature of their circumstance as well.
Right. Sorry, I have a few questions. Any quick productive thoughts on Moline's new policy, or did they just copy us and they don't offer much?
It's pretty nearly a copy. When speaking with them, they do discuss it as though it's some radical new idea, though in conversation with some of their staff, they have some of the same concerns about getting caught up because they've never done it before, so they're going to have that same hump we've never been able to clear. Their housing stock is in a better condition, generally speaking, though, so they may have an easier time of it. They are hiring, I believe, 5 inspectors exclusively to do some of this work, so their staffing levels will be different than ours, in addition to their starting place being a little bit better. One of the things, though, that we do need to look at is some of their internal process and some of the internal things they may be doing that are not obvious just by reading the ordinance. And that is something that we will be in dialogue with our counterparts about.
Okay.
Their current building official, in fact, is a former CED department employee here.
Oh, yeah.
So we have that collegiate connection.
And that rapport. I know that the Inspections Commission, the newly formed Inspection Commission, has been tasked with thinking about this.
Correct.
I missed the last Inspections Commission's meeting. Any thoughts from that group yet that you can
I did not
summarize?
attend, but the building official can comment on that.
There wasn't a lot of comment based on the draft from the Inspections Commission, just some small details in the ordinance. One of them being, changing to not less than every 5 years as opposed to every 5 years, if that's kind of one of the lanes we're going to go down. And just some minor verbiage stuff like that, but nothing earth-shattering.
But that'll be an ongoing discussion.
Correct. Yeah, we're not done discussing the updates to the ordinance.
Okay. And then I had also asked you, Miles, about sort of existing state regulation with respect to property management. Being a property manager is a licensed profession from the state of Illinois. These LLCs that own rental properties need to have a certificate of good standing with the Secretary of State. Are we considering any sort of double checking the
Yeah,
there's already
that-
rules on the books. We might want to double check that.
That kind of is part of the internal process discussion as well that goes along with the updates to the ordinance, because it currently doesn't really say much about that kind of thing, and it should. So,
Yeah, I'll just say from the perspective of I'm a landlord here in Rock Island. I have 2 rental properties.
they're among you, everyone. They're among you.
Yeah, exactly. And while I'm sympathetic to not bringing the hammer down on landlords, I'm also thinking of the landlords I like to think of as myself that do the right thing, that pay the money to maintain properly maintained properties. It's not fair for landlords who are spending the money to maintain safe and affordable housing to then be undercut by slumlords that are breaking in just as much rent but not maintaining their property here in Rock Island. So just for the record, I suppose, I understand the concern about pushing investors away out of Rock Island, but
Yeah.
at the same time, you got to follow the rules like the rest of us are doing.
So being a landlord is no different than being another type of business person. And so the way that the CED department overall thinks about it is the same way we might think about the regulations we apply to any other businesses. On one hand, we want to make sure that we're maintaining a safe built environment where everyone's playing by the same obvious, transparent rules and everyone's treated the exact same way, to what you're saying. At the same time, we want to make sure that we're identifying bad actors and holding them accountable. So that balance is very much in our minds. Rental properties are really no different than a lot of other commercial activities, and that's kind of the mindset we take.
Thank you.
Which speaks exactly to what Alderman Healy was saying. Those inspectors coming to your commercial property, they should have the same positive, friendly, helpful tone that an inspector coming to one of your rental properties has.
Yeah. Appreciate the time, everyone. That's all my questions.
No, that's fine, that's right. Yes.
So I have two comments, issues. One of which is, I know there are other communities that have like a tenant's bill of rights. I'd like to see something like that, because I think a tenant should be protected. If they're reporting serious life safety issues and the landlord retaliates, there should be some protection for that tenant. So that's one thing. The other thing, so in the statistics, so we're at almost 38% of housing units are now rentals. And I don't know if we've been tracking that. We should be tracking that every year. I don't know if you know what it was back like in, say, 2016. Because I know, for example, in my ward, there's one particular, 23rd Avenue. It's gone from primarily home ownership to mostly rentals. And so the closer we get to hitting over 50% rentals is not good for the city of Rock Island's future. So we need to be very mindful of that and figure out what we can do to encourage home ownership as much as possible.
Right. I think 38% is pretty high.
It is. It's
That's
very
right.
high. But I'm curious what it was before.
Yeah.
Got two quick follow-ups. On average, how many inspections are we doing a year?
That chart earlier kind of shows
Sorry if I
that.
missed that.
So you can see it's variable with kind of a dip because of the pandemic. In 2021, part of the reason that there's that spike there is because for a period of time, we were doing only external property inspections because people would not allow us into their properties during kind of the continuation of the pandemic. So that number is somewhat inflated because there's additional numbers in there because of that. You can do a quick external inspection, then keep moving.
That's 1443?
1786.
In 2023, the total was 1,443 inspections completed,
Gotcha.
up from 1,215 the year before.
Okay.
But the 1786 was just external only because
It's a mix. So that number is a real outlier in the same way that the previous year in 2020, that dip down to 524 is also an outlier. That kind of downward trend in 2019 also involves the loss of a staff member who to retirement. So that's also there.
And you did mention something about digitizing the inspections. Have we looked at software costs?
That is all wrapped up in the ERP discussion and has been one of the primary focuses of CED's participation in that process. I kid you not right now, in order to like pull numbers together, much to Alderwoman Swanson's question, like, okay, so this landlord, is there a way I can search all of their different LLCs rapidly and figure out how much they have? Not quickly. It's just a manual go through the list, kind of count them up. So getting better kind of data management tools through that process is one of our, chief concerns.
And we're like 2-3 years out on that though, right?
I would have to defer to the IT director for more detail on that, but I would say we're getting closer and closer to
So I
it.
guess what I'm trying to get at, is there any way we can find anything in the meantime that we can use that will help not really increase, not and speed them up, but can kind of make it a little bit more consistent?
Some of those other solutions I talked about, like the streamlining of processes, getting better at like managing our forms, that's something that the building official has been working on with his team. I think that we've actually in the last couple of years made some significant improvements in kind of simplifying things so that we can do more faster, as well as hiring those administrative positions, which had been empty for a while, and getting those folks just on that data setup track, because one of the things we're chiefly aware of now, looking ahead to those new software solutions, is we've got to have the data ready to port in, right? So trying to get it organized and ready for that process has been a focus, and I think is also helpful for the shorter term.
Because, to be honest, one of my biggest concerns is that the number of rentals that we have, and I'm sure there's plenty that we don't even know of.
Yep.
And the age.
If you look at the number we have registered versus what the census estimates we have,
Right.
we're talking a near 1,000 unit difference.
So I'm
So
look-
we know what our target is, but we've got a long way to go.
I'm also looking at the age of those homes.
Correct.
That they're not getting any better, and if we haven't even did the initial inspection, So all of that just keep, it
Yep.
just keep compounding. Okay.
Yep, you're identifying exactly what we're communicating. I mean, that's the challenge that we've faced. You know, over 20 years, you know, I think staff at different times have kind of had starts and stops in trying to make this program work. Again, all of those different variables, all of the different uphill issues have made it very difficult to be truly successful. But there are things we can do to continue to move the needle.
So I guess I have to ask this question that's not very favorable, but do we need to contract that portion out where we can get a company in to do our inspections for us? So we can get the initial inspections, even just possibly probably get us through that hump of the initial inspections. I'm just very concerned about the number that we haven't even touched, because I'm sure there's probably 5 in my neighborhood alone that are not listed
Sure.
to be inspected.
So I think a slightly different way of looking at your question would be how many resources is the council interested in allocating towards this kind of effort?
Right.
Right. Contracting it out wouldn't be free, hiring more staff wouldn't be free, reducing priority work elsewhere, you know, isn't free, it comes at a cost. This has come up multiple times over the 20 years, right? You know, where does this fall in the totality of council's priorities? What is the value within the budget that you would assign to this? Because we could hire more inspectors, we could contract it out, we could do all these things, but they all cost more money.
Definitely.
And so, you know, one of the things that we need to think about is just where this falls in that scope. No easy answers either,
Oh, I'm sure.
you know. I would love it if I had 5 inspectors who had nothing else that they were dedicated to except housing.
But I'm
But
sure all of
that's-
us sitting up
that's a
here,
lift.
we can agree with, like Alderperson Swanson said, we don't want to be put in a situation like our neighbors were.
Mm-hmm.
We can't use that as an excuse. That's not going to look well in the newspaper or
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
on TV.
Agreed.
So I'm just saying, that's something that we definitely need to start thinking about, or at least let's have the discussion about it. You know, figure out what the cost is. so
Yeah,
we can-
this all comes back to what Alderman Parker was bringing up about that strategic housing plan question. Really laying out, you know, what would we need to do more broadly
Right.
with housing? Not just getting this program up to snuff, but also creating more units, the right kind of units, incentivizing things the right way, how to optimize what limited resources we have available to the greatest extent. So, agreed, staff is entirely on that page.
Question for you.
Yes.
What, and if I'm asking the same thing else that's already been asked, please shut me down, but what legal authority do our inspectors have to go onto a person's property to inspect it, and they say, you have no legal authority to be here, get out, and not allow them to do the inspection? Have we had issues like that? And if so, do we continue to have them? And if we do, what can we do to stop that?
So I will answer it in part, but then I would defer to the city attorney to offer a little bit more legal clarity. Short answer is yes. From time to time, we have individuals who say that we have, you know, no right to inspect their property, that we cannot enter it to do an inspection, that we do not have the constitutional authority to regulate their business activity. We politely remind them that we do, and that authority, Ms.
Right,
Day, would you like
we-
to elaborate on?
We actually take it to circuit court and we file for an administrative search warrant to be able to enter the property and do the inspection. So we get it signed off by a judge the same way that you would at any other search warrant.
And would you like to comment a little bit on just the legal justification for doing a kind of an inspection of this kind or a program like this? It's very similar to almost all other business regulation in that there's a public welfare component that we are fulfilling. And again, we're not going above and beyond what would be considered the standard minimum code.
That's correct.
But how often does that occur?
Not very often.
Not too often.
Less than 3 a year, less than 1 a year.
Two in your entire tenure? Yeah.
So let me ask you a question. If you had to go get a warrant to do this, what would be the basis that you would use to get the warrant to go in? Would there have to be something of
So-
substance? You just can't say, just because we want to get in there and look at it.
So non-compliance, they have to allow us in, under our code to review. And that's been enough with the court system to allow us to go in and inspect. It's based on public safety, welfare, all of that.
But there has to be some documentation, correct? To say,
No.
hey, there's a reason for, So you're saying
We
that
just-
you don't
we-
even have to have a welfare concern? You don't
We
even have to
s-
cite one?
We cite the ordinance that allows us to go in and inspect, and then we detail their unwillingness to allow us into the property to do the inspection, and that's enough.
Rentals are different than private property.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wouldn't be the same if it was just an owner-occupied home.
Right.
That would be different. But in this case, it's a business activity, so it falls into a different part of the law. So like if I was just coming to your house and said, I'm going to inspect your house, and you refused, we may not have a basis for getting any kind of warrant to go in there. But if you're the landlord and it's your rental property, and we have this ordinance in place that says in order to operate that business, you have to have the property inspected and hold a license for it, then that's the grounds for getting the warrant
And
to
the reason I
enter.
ask is, let's just equate it to the police getting a warrant, right? There's got to be, they got to go to the judge, they have to say this is why we want the warrant. Just because we want to go in there and take a look is usually not a probable cause to get the warrant. That's why I was wondering if there's something that's more underlying when it comes to this to, I guess, to back that up. So.
Yeah, and again, speaking to the fact that many landlords are good operators, we rarely have this come up. It does occasionally come up, but it's particularly rare. Usually we have a polite discussion about the need for public safety and public welfare to be maintained, and we move forward.
Judith, did you have another question?
Yes, I did. How long has the inspector position been vacant, the one that's vacant?
So this is the position that had been held vacant as a budgetary matter through COVID, so it was held open for, I think, almost 3 budget cycles, I think. It has been out for hire since the middle of this past year. We did go through one hiring round and had a couple of solid candidates that ultimately did not accept the position. We are hoping to have a hire sometime quite soon, or at least an offer letter going out the door this week. So we're hoping to get that filled at long last.
Okay. Thank you very much. Appreciate
Yes,
it.
thank you.
They never are.
All right. Leslie, you're up next. Bill, you gonna cry over this next one, or what?
All right, Bill.
Conscientiously objecting.
All right, so you all should have gotten an email from me around December 27th. That was our 32-page liquor ordinance. Because it's so lengthy, we wanted to give it to you, way in advance of us passing it, just so you could review it. And then we also decided to do this work session so I can kind of just go over the basic changes that we're doing and getting some feedback. I want to stress that this is not set in stone. We're still making changes, so that's why we wanted to get some feedback from council to see what changes we want to make. And I'm going to go through each of these changes that we're going to be doing. So the first one that we are discussing is eliminating the 5-member liquor commission. Currently, we have the liquor commission that can meet, the meetings are as needed, which is really loosey-goosey, but it's usually when there's a violation or something else where we have to have the hearing. It's statutorily, it's not a requirement to have members on this commission. The problems that we can have that arise is that, particularly with OMA issues, if you're wanting to discuss the matter with other commission members, it's all part of public record, you're kind of having that discussion on the record. And ultimately, it is the liquor commissioner's decision. So it's kind of just cutting away the middleman there and just having the liquor commissioner. It's going to allow us some flexibility in scheduling hearings as well. So right now, we have a hearing officer, we have a court reporter, and we have the liquor commissioner as well as legal counsel if you're talking about an actual hearing. If you're also trying to coordinate with commission members and doing things on a, fairly fast basis, it's really difficult to get everyone involved. In fact, we've had some hearings where we don't have all of the members there, we just have the liquor commissioner. So this way, we're just going to have the liquor commissioner run the meeting because ultimately it is their decision anyways. The other changes we're going to make that we've discussed making is the residency requirement. So right now we have a residency requirement of 25 miles from City Hall. we want to expand that to 35 miles. The thinking there is as the Quad Cities is kind of expanding out, you're eliminating some potential business opportunities there. We also, again, we haven't looked at this ordinance in a very long time. We had some things listed there about people that are ineligible for licenses that really shouldn't be listed. So there were some misdemeanor crimes that is a little bit silly, especially because under the State Liquor Commission, you actually can have a felony and have a liquor license if you meet certain guidelines. So we're just trying to clean that language up so it's more in line with state law. The location requirement, this is by state law, the 100 feet of any church, school, and other institution of higher learning. I'm working with zoning and trying to clean up that language a little bit so that it makes more sense from a zoning perspective as well as from the State Liquor Act perspective. And then one of the big changes is this signature requirement. I'm sure you guys remember individuals having to come before council and requesting a waiver of the signature requirement. It really has made it difficult for us then if that decision is appealed because it looks like council is approving that establishment, even if that's not necessarily was the intent. The intent was just to waive that signature requirement. So if there's an appeal, it really does hurt the city's position. It's very difficult to get this, all the signatures of the businesses just because of the way that the landowners are around the businesses. A lot of them don't live in Rock Island. They may live out of state. So we're just eliminating that entirely. But we still want to have notice letters sent to neighboring businesses. And again, this is only for establishments that it's the first time that a liquor establishment has been in this location. So just for these new businesses. And so we would send these notice letters to the same 300 feet of all property owners and then give them time to file an objection or to kind of provide comment as to why they don't want to have that establishment there. Just to give the liquor commissioner, some background information that they might consider when they're deciding whether or not to grant or deny a liquor license. And we are going to charge an additional application fee there of $25 just for the cost of mailing and staff time because we want to make sure that it's getting done. So we'll be doing it from the city clerk's office. The other big thing that we're doing is class and option changes. So specifically, the bowling theater, we used to have a class that was just for bowling theater. I kind of looked at Moline has something similar, and other neighboring jurisdictions have something similar, where we're talking about more of an incidental purpose, just meaning that the primary purpose isn't to serve alcohol. So, for example, if we had something come in like the Last Picture House or something like that, where it really is more of a movie theater, it would be easier for them to get a liquor license, and they wouldn't be considered a tavern. Caterer's license and caterer's option, I'll get into it a little bit more when I'm talking about fees, because I do want some feedback there. Right now, you have to be a Rock Island business to have a caterer's option, is what we call it. Under this license, and again, this is similar to what other neighboring jurisdictions are doing that are home rule, what we would allow for is outside businesses, the businesses that do not reside within the city of Rock Island, to obtain a caterer's license if they meet certain guidelines. A caterer's option would be available to Rock Island businesses specifically, and that would just be an option on top of your license. Tavern with package sales and without package sales, we kind of already had this before. I'm just cleaning up the language there to make it a little bit clearer. And then the special event and the temporary licenses, we are trying to expand that in a way that we are encouraging more events, especially with the downtown. We're going to expand it, and we're trying to kind of draw people back into the downtown area. We want to have the ability to have more of these special events. So if we're talking about like a craft brewery festival, they have those in Moline, they have them in Davenport, they have them in Bettendorf. We don't have a lot of those down here. So we're just trying to make sure that we're allowing and welcoming of all these other different events that we can be doing with these new classes and options. Similarly, the outdoor events and outdoor license option, again, kind of encouraging that outdoor space usage if they meet certain requirements with fencing and noise level and that sort of thing. And then we currently in our code still have an adult cabaret provision, so we're just going to eliminate that because right now we no longer have any adult cabaret establishments. I think the way that it's currently written, if there was like 3 that was granted until they kept going away until there was 0, well, right now there's 0, so we're just going to get rid of that language entirely. And then we're also going to give the commissioner the ability to investigate as the appropriate class. So what this will enable is, as we're going to talk about some caps on certain licenses, if someone comes in and they apply for a restaurant license because they, know that there's no cap in a license, but really they are operating as a tavern and they're not serving food, this gives the commissioner the ability to really look at the business model and the business itself and say, you know what, you're not in their appropriate class. This isn't a valid application. Or when you come up for renewal, we'll say, you know what, you're actually a tavern and we've met the cap and you're not serving food. So just giving the commissioner a little bit of flexibility to really investigate as to what kind of business establishment there is there. So these are the classes that we're looking at for caps. So what we did actually is I pulled about 15 other municipalities and their codes that are home rule jurisdictions that are roughly the same size. And I looked to see if they also had these caps on certain classes, and about roughly half of them did. So if we enact this, the idea is to get rid of the moratorium that we currently have in place, and we would adopt this instead. So the classes that we're looking at that would have these caps are your, basically your liquor stores, your convenience stores, and your bars. And the numbers there are reflective of how many are in each class currently. So those can be changed, but what I did was looked at, based on the list of the current liquor class holders, what class they would be in and what that cap currently is to kind of reflect that. And then so the commissioner would be able to award up to those number of classes. It's obviously, can always be amended by council, right? Council can always come back, pass an ordinance and say, actually, we want to increase Class A packaged primary to 5. No problem. So the cap on that license would go up. Similarly, they could say Class B, we want to have that go down to 10, and then it's down to 10. So these are always, they're always able to be amended there. So the rules on caps that we have here is that we make it clear it does not limit existing licensed businesses nor to the purchaser of a licensed business. So anyone that currently has a valid liquor license, they can have a current valid liquor license. If they go to sell that establishment, the person that's purchasing that, provided it's in the same class, automatically can have that, can get that class, provided they meet all the other requirements for a liquor license. As licenses are revoked, expire, or cease to exist, then the class will be reduced until the cap is met. So let's say for whatever reason we actually have 24 in Class C, it would just keep reducing until we met that cap. And so that's why we could change those numbers in those classes if you wanted to, so it's not reflective of the current outlook. And then the commissioner has the ability to grant additional licenses. Now, we can do it through the commissioner. We could also have it go back to council if you guys wanted to be more involved in the process. Some jurisdictions do that. So I kind of want some feedback there, what you guys are thinking. But what the commissioner will look at is basically what is the best interest of the city and is it for public convenience purposes. And then we kind of have a non-exhaustive list of different things for the commissioner to really think about. These are the proposed fees. I also wanted some feedback here. The proposed fees for all of the municipalities that I looked at are all over the place. Some are as low as $500, $1,000. Some are as high as $4,000, or City of Chicago's like $6,000. So I tried to find something in the middle. I will say East Moline's about $1,000 for everything, and Moline is $1,400 for a good portion of theirs. So in some of ours are higher than the $1,400, and then some of it's lower. So it's roughly that. We can talk about decreasing if you wanted to look at that package, Class A and B. Those are the most expensive at $2,000. If you're wanting to reduce that, that's absolutely something I want your feedback on. The other thing that I want your feedback on is the caterer So for this one, there's a caterer license, and I guess that's on the caterer's option I'll point out to you. But again, we're reducing, or it's lower than our neighboring jurisdictions in some classes, but in some classes it is more there. And I kind of just wanted to show you what the current and the proposal is. So the other thing that I want feedback on specifically is the caterer's option. So this is just an option for Rock Island held businesses, Rock Island held restaurants or banquet facilities. If you're one of those, you can get what's called a caterer's option. Now, some jurisdictions, they have free options. So currently I reduced this option, but we also could allow this to be free. Now that we are allowing other entities to get this Rock Island caterer's license, this would encourage Rock Island restaurants, Rock Island banquet facilities, that sort of thing, to be able to have this caterer's option without having to pay an additional fee, or we could just reduce it to the $250. So that's entirely up to you. Going back, I will say too that for the caterer's license, it is a reduced fee there. The $350 is for city-owned, or not city-owned, I'm sorry, for Rock Island-owned catering facilities, and then the $750 is for out-of-state, or out-of-city, sorry. Okay, and then we are also changing the hearing procedures. So right now, if there's a denial or a non-renewal, there's no hearing before the liquor commissioner. We just send a letter and that's it. That has hurt us in the past because we are an on-the-record jurisdiction, which means that if there is an appeal to the State Liquor Commission, we don't really have a record of the proceedings or the thought process as to why we denied that liquor license. So by having a hearing before the liquor commissioner, the same way that we would for a revocation or a suspension, it's really going to enable us to have a solid record to send to the appeals board. We also are going to have the hearing officer, which is just an administrative hearing officer, just to conduct the meetings. The commissioner will still be the one that has the ultimate decision, but the hearing officer will make rules as like evidentiary rules and kind of guide the proceedings. We also have court reporter, or it has been difficult for us to get a court reporter, so we have the option of waiving it so long as we are recording it at the same time, and then we send that recording to a court reporter who is able to type it out to send to the State Liquor Commission if there is an appeal. And then finally, some public safety measures that we're adopting. Cameras currently, for anyone with an extended hours option, so this is up to 2 o'clock. Right now for downtown, they have to have cameras. We're just saying in general, they have to have cameras no matter if you're downtown or not. We are implementing also ID scanners for this extended hours option, but any current establishment is grandfathered in, so they do not have to get these ID scanners. These ID scanners aren't that much. I was doing some research on them. They're about $700, but they're really helpful for the police. That's some of the feedback that we got from the police, is that having these IDs scanned for if you're going in after 10 o'clock and they're open until 2 o'clock, it just helps for public safety measures. And then an emergency shutdown provision, I added where the chief of police or his designee can go in and shut down any establishment for a period of 24 hours if there has been some kind of crime, just to secure the scene. And that's just because currently the mayor does have that ability, but if you're not able to get a hold of him, or it's like, 2 a.m., you want to make sure that we're able to get in there. And then lastly, the business has to be in good standing, which basically states that if they owe any food and beverage taxes, water bills, judgments, fines, or any other amount outstanding and due to the city has the option of not renewing that license, as well as enforcing those non-payment of fines. So next step, our moratorium expires on March 31st. So we want to try to get this passed relatively soon, just because we need to send reminders about renewal by March 1st. The goal is for the January 22nd council agenda. If you guys still need more time to digest that, we can push that to the first meeting in February as well. But I am requesting any further comments or revisions due to me by January 12th, just so we can kind of look at everything and make sure we've got those changes in place. So I know I talked really fast just to try to get it all at you, but I wanted to kind of provide this opportunity for some feedback, some discussions, so we know what kind of changes we need to make. Yes.
I guess I kind of want to go back to the location under the page 4 here. So it says 100 feet of any,
Yes.
I guess the thing with the neighborhoods. We have several bars that probably are not, so what happens with that? Are we just talking new businesses?
So this is still a current requirement. It's actually a requirement under the State Liquor Control Act. And it's basically 100 feet, and it's only related to bars and taverns. It doesn't relate to restaurants or anything like that. But the liquor commissioner has the ability to waive that requirement under state law. So it's, yes, so this would only be for new businesses that are coming in. We wouldn't be kicking any established businesses out from their current location.
No, we have plenty. Second question, real quick. So these ID scanners,
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? What information is that taking in? What do they do with the information?
So it's scanning your license just to making sure that it's a valid license.
Okay.
And from my understanding, it also keeps a record of who was in that establishment that evening. So if there is an altercation, you're able to pull what licenses were scanned.
Okay.
There's a couple other things you can do with it, though. You can actually program the scanner for if you have bar patrons. It'll show up. It really checks for fake IDs as well as if the ID is current. But it does keep a log of how many people are actually coming into the establishment. It does keep a database of that. The cost is around $700 or $800.
Yes.
But sometimes that can incur more of a cost with the database, access to a database. So that can vary a little bit.
Here, the $700 one's junk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard that.
Well,
so.
and to be clear, these ID scanners would only be for new establishments that are requesting the extended hours option. So if you currently have an extended hours option, you are not required to have an ID scanner.
Or if they've gone in front of the liquor commission and there's disciplinary issues.
That if they
that
already
can be-
have an order in place, yes, that's required.
Saying this is only for extended hour?
Yes, both that and the cameras.
Okay, so does that mean that the scanners are only being used during
10
the-
o'clock is when you would start using them.
Okay,
And we would require them on everybody?
Anyone with an extended hours option.
So if I go in, I'm 45 years old, you would have to scan my license?
Yes.
That ain't happening.
You're 45.
For some of us, that makes us happy.
I know, right?
I have a couple questions
Yeah.
on the fee schedule.
Yes.
So for most of the caterers, would they not already fall under another category?
Yes. So that's why for the caterers option, so there's two different caterers issues here. So we've got the caterer's license, and so that can be for if they were just wanting a caterer's license to operate within the city of Rock Island. Your caterer's option is if you are a restaurant, banquet facility, or city-owned property, you can also apply for a caterer's option. So that's why I am open, depending on council feedback, waiving that fee because they are already paying for a liquor license fee under one of the other ones.
Yeah, that was
think-
my
I
thought.
think that's kind of
Was
an
I the
incentive.
only one and the city had one? Am I correct, John?
I would
I
be
gave
surprised
mine
that
up.
there's not more restaurants that would have them, and more restaurants might be more, if it's free, they might be
My caterer's
encouraged
license.
to.
Yeah. And then the other thing was, the only issue I have is like Class A and B. I mean, that's like 100% increase. And, and with our previous conversation about being more business friendly.
Sure.
I don't know, I guess I personally feel that's kind of steep to increase it that much in 1 year.
And we could change it down. Like I said, it varies so much. But if you look at like Moline, they're at 1,400. 1,500 might be more palatable. I will say our other classes where we're looking at 1,100, they're still at 1,400 for a lot of those. So we're cheaper in some places, and then maybe a little bit more expensive for other classes. Kind of evens out. But yeah, was kind of I don't want to say an arbitrary number, but it was a number that we're looking at all the other home rule municipalities. But if you are looking at the other ones, like our sister cities, it probably is a little bit high.
Yeah.
I have a question about I haven't seen it in the ordinance. I know it is in the ordinance, calls of service. So if there's an incident at the establishment, they got to call the
Yep.
police. A lot of the feedback I'm getting from a lot of these agents or organizations are that it's kind of being used against them. If they call for service, then it's documented that we had to come out, we had to do this. So that's, you know what I mean? It's preventing them to want to call because they know it's going to be used against them at a hearing. How can we work that?
Yeah, what I would tell them is it's going to be a much bigger deal if they don't call it in.
Oh, no, I know
and then we
that.
do hear about it, because that would be grounds for suspension.
Right.
And so, yes, I think just, depending on what the incident is, they wouldn't get a violation based on the fact that they didn't call us, right? So the way that our ordinance reads as it relates to disorderly conduct or that sort of thing inside of an establishment, one of the factors is whether or not you called, right? So if there was something and they were proactively trying to stop like a fight within their establishment or right outside their establishment and they called the city, that's going to be a factor in their favor that they wouldn't really be facing the same kind of repercussions.
I'm not sure. Well, I can only speak
In
on
theory.
what I've heard
Yeah.
and what I've seen.
Yes.
It's used against them. No matter what the circumstance is. If they're calling for service because either it's out of their, got out of control, or they're just calling for help, it's used against them ultimately if it has to go in front of the commissioner. It's ultimately used against them. So it's almost like a double-edged sword. You're screwed if you call, you're screwed if you don't call.
We can make the clarification there. The language is there, but we can clean up the language a little bit that states that one of the factors that the commissioner needs to, that they would consider is whether or not, how did they cooperate with police, if they did call, that sort of thing. Just kind of giving them those extra points that they are really trying to work with the city and not have any disorderly conduct within their establishment. Yes.
Okay, I want to go back to the ID scanners once again,
'Kay.
sorry. So how long, I guess, where is this data stored? Who has access to the data? How long is the data held for? I mean, obviously, if there's a crime and you want to go back and access it, I mean, where does it get stored and who has access to it?
So I think that would be based on the database that you have with the ID scanner. If there's an incident, again, that's, as we were kind of talking about with the calling of the police, it's your willingness to share that information with the police officers as to who was inside your establishment. But I think it's based on the actual, whoever you're getting your ID scanner from, there's different software that keeps that database.
I guess my concern would be that someone that maybe is running this, the bar or whatever, and has access to this, is able to get access to, like, patrons, that I think there's kind of almost a privacy issue there. I mean, I understand the safety and the usefulness in certain aspects, but I feel like if you're scanning everybody's and it's got all their information on it, their address, I kind of feel like that's a violation of some people's privacy and who is able to get that.
One thing I can speak of, I know of one organization that's using it right now. What's captured is birth date, name, and sex. That's what's captured. So that's what's in the database. It's scanning your back of their ID, so it's scanning that barcode. In the database that's kept on that particular system is the name, their birth date, and their sex. It doesn't have any other information.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things. I mean, in today's age, I feel like and I understand the police side of it, I understand the safety side of it, all that. However, I'm a little bit without any more information on how this information and who has access to it. I guess I'd want more information on
And it's
that before we
cloud-based.
decide to do that.
Yeah, it's most likely cloud-based, but the more expensive of the, whatever the company you're going with, the more money you pay for, you get more things.
Nope, not arguing that. I'm just saying, before we decide and institute that as part of this ordinance here, I would like to have a little bit more information on specifics with that.
Okay.
I think that's gonna be kinda hard though, because there's so many different, it's
Well-
almost like a cell phone.
No?
So you have so many different, companies with cell phones. You're gonna run to the same thing with this scanner. You have so many variations of it, and you're gonna have a
How do
cheap
we know
company.
which variation? The one may only do one, but one may pull an address. We don't know that.
Exactly, that's what I mean. Unless we specifically say, hey, you have to use this because we vetted that, you're gonna,
If it's used and it's locked in with certain information, I get it, but until I'm certain that we're not pulling everybody's addresses and stuff where it's accessible to other people, I'm not real comfortable.
Of course, it's legal, at this point, it's been legal, because
so they use it all the time. The issue is that one of the, I hate to say, the number one issues that's been in front of us before,
You want your address going out to everybody?
I think everybody's already got it, but
Almost like
It's
It's almost like what you'll have to do if you go to a casino or if you go to a federal installation. There's a
Yeah.
sign stating that, you know, if you come on the arsenal, your vehicle can subject to search. I'm thinking the businesses are pretty much gonna have to do the same thing. By entering this establishment, your information is gonna get captured.
I would just like to know what information is captured, to
Definitely,
make sure we can designate what information is.
And we could, I mean, right now we have it as a enforcement mechanism for maybe more of our problem bars. And so we are incorporating this. It was part of the feedback that we received from other departments, that they thought that it would be useful.
I can see it as a deterrent.
But
for
we could
sure.
keep it, we could keep it as a deterrent too. We're just, and again, this is just for bars going forward, not anyone that's currently in place that does not have it.
the technology of fake IDs these days
Yeah.
is so good and everything else. And that's, I hate to say the number one complaint or issue that we have, but it's close, it's up there high, that we've had to cite individuals, because an incident happened, it turned out they had a fake ID, and,
The birth date, understand the name, I'm just a little bit
But even with
leery
that-
of the address part
Even
of
with
it,
that,
so-
unless you have vetted that company, because as a database administrator, I can come up with something that can make it seem like it's doing what it's supposed to do, and it's not doing anything.
yeah.
So, I mean, unless you're vetting the company to get what you really want, to ensure that it's gonna check a real ID, it's gonna, document who's in the establishment, you can get that from anything. So, again, it's a gray area, unless you're vetting an actual company that you're ensure that they're gonna get what you say, you're just pretty much, you're
Not
on a
opposed
wish.
to it, I'm just kind of,
Sure.
there's just some questions and concerns of, who has
I can see
it,
if I can pull any other information on
address
it
or,
and send it to you.
Is there any consideration for building and zoning violations? I've got some, what's
Yes.
the word I'm looking for? I've got some problem liquor stores in my ward that have
Yes.
chronic building code violations, nuisance violations.
Yes.
Can those be used to not allow them to have a renewal?
Yes. So
Okay, that's
under
all.
the.
We don't have much time. If the
Yep,
answer is yes,
under
we're
the
good.
current, it states that they can't owe any money to the city of Rock Island, so that would include any municipal judgments for building violations. It also, there's language that says if you wouldn't be granted an application, like when you first applied, you are not subject to renewal. And there's stuff within our first application where we look at the building sustainability and suitability. So yes, we can absolutely not renew those.
Property taxes?
Good standing.
Yep. And then I didn't really hear any feedback. Are we okay with the caps on certain licenses then that we currently have? Okay,
Good with the non-Rock Island caterer, too.
okay.
Get it?
No.
They're not. And even I had the catering license, I gave it up. It's honestly not worth it in one aspect. The reason is honestly the legality of it. So I get a special use permit when I do something off-site. The reason is because if you get that liquor, you can return that liquor if you don't use it. Otherwise, you do not. So say we were using our catering license, I had 3 separate liquor licenses, and you have to keep all of that liquor separate. That if I go down to Schwiebert Park and I cater, none of that liquor that I purchased for that event from a catering license can be anywhere near all of my other liquor for, say, Bridges Catering or the Stern Center. But if I do a one-day special use permit, Stern Beverage brings down a trailer, I can use that liquor, or that beer, and whatever I don't go through, I can return. So it is, it's gonna be hard, so I think we do need to do something there, because it honestly, what we have doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So, and the city, I understand, gets it, and John, you guys did it for, the ballpark, correct? Yeah, exactly. So, understandable. So, I get it.
I do got one more question about the
Yeah.
scanners. So, since the fact that we are collecting or having them collect data, would the city ever be put on the hook if there's a data breach with that establishment and that information gets leaked or anything?
No, I mean, because they're not recording it for us. They're recording it just to make sure that they're following compliance, that everyone entering their establishment is of 21, they're using valid IDs.
Do we have to put some language in the ordinance to make sure that we can't be in, attached with something?
Yeah, I can look at that language and just to clarify that. Okay. And then
Right.
again, if there's anything else that you think of, just email me. Sorry.
Okay?
I work on databases all day. So.
No, I agree. It's just a 39-page ordinance. I'll just sit there. But no, thank you for everybody's input, and we'll get this going pretty soon here.
We have a first and
Yeah,
second
motion and a
already.
second.
We got a motion to adjourn, we got a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Adjourn for 5